Hi there, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm an author of the book The Curse in Their Veins and also a doctor of clinical psychology. Today I'm going to be answering a question I got about my favorite genres and what I look for in a good book. This is something that I was considering making anyway because honestly I feel like it's important when you have a book related channel or you're rating and reviewing books to be on the same page with people about what it is that you actually look for. Like we all have our subjective lenses that we rate books through. So I think it's generally wise to sort of be on the same page with people about what makes a good book in your eyes so that when you're reviewing a book, you can understand if they agree or disagree with you a little bit more based on like your individual lens. So I'm going to talk about my favorite genres, including fiction and nonfiction, what I look for in a fiction book and what I look for in a nonfiction book. Let's get straight into it. I would say those genres that I read the most from are either occult fiction or paranormal fiction. It's gotta always hint at something more and yet be set in our current existing world. It's not necessarily high fantasy set in a different universe, in a different world. It is still set in our current world, except there is some element of something being a little bit supernatural. So ghosts, witches, Jungian symbolism, love all that stuff. I would say this one is a little bit more of a rare find, but I do appreciate magical realism too, and I would say that one is a little bit different in that the supernatural elements in magical realism seem very normal to all the characters in the book. One that I read recently that was a good magical realism read was The Mermaid of Black Conch. I also really appreciate gothic horror books. So for instance, one that I really liked was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This was my favorite book of hers. Sometimes I find her protagonists to be a little bit irking in that they just seem a little bit juvenile in their tone. This one I appreciated specifically because it always hinted at like ghosts. It had a very unique twist on it. It embedded a lot of Jungian symbolism, discussions of the collective unconscious, themes of racism. So this was a great read. I would totally recommend it. Another gothic horror that I read recently was Dead of November by Craig A. Brockman. And by the way, these are all on my Amazon storefront, so if you're looking to buy any of these, doing so through my Amazon storefront is at no additional cost to you. It just gives me a tiny percentage that would instead just go fully to Amazon. I'm pretty sure Dead of November is a self-published indie author. I don't even really know how I came across this book on Amazon, but I really appreciated all the indigenous mythology that was embedded in it, the ghosts, the nautical, midwestern, wintry feel of it. Loved the atmosphere. It also had some psychological elements. It had a twist in there. So I would totally recommend that one, especially if you want to support indie authors. And then fantasy, I do appreciate from time to time. The one that immediately comes to mind is A Song of Fire and Ice by George R.R. Martin. You may know it through its name, Game of Thrones. I did think it was a really brilliant series. He writes so beautifully. The characters are engaging. The themes are really important. The world is so well fleshed out. So I really love that series. Probably my favorite fantasy series. I would just say usually I prefer fantastical elements still embedded in our current world over like high fantasy because that just seems a little bit more approachable to me personally. Now, as for fiction, I typically just read self-help and research discussions, so anything related to psychology written by psychology researchers or spirituality written by spiritual gurus. I love all that stuff. Recently, I've also been reading a lot of money-related books, and I will actually make a video about that, and I'll also explain why I've been reading a lot of money mindset books. And it's been very helpful. I think as a young woman who hasn't really received any formal training in like what to do with money, how to use it, how to save up for retirement, it's very valuable, and I think that's information that everyone should have access to. It's definitely not like my favorite thing to read about. I would much rather read a self-help book or a fiction book, but like I said, I think it's really important to know that stuff. And I forgot to mention on the fiction front, I also really appreciate psychological thrillers. I think in a sense, Psychological thrillers and supernatural or fantastical fiction are in similar genres because they're both always hinting at something more underneath the surface. I love the tension, the suspense aspect of it, the not knowing what's beneath the facade. And so I especially love when magical elements are used as a metaphor for mental issues or mental disorders. Because both are, in a sense, invisible and affect the world around us. What do I look for in a fiction book? The very first thing that I look for, this is the most important to me. If a book doesn't have it, I do not like that book. I need really vivid imagery, really lush descriptions. I need to be transported into that world. It's a book that needs to make my mouth water. And look, it doesn't have to be a beautiful place. It doesn't have to be set in a European castle for me to appreciate it. It can be set in the slums of the Appalachian Mountains. I don't care. It just needs to transport me there. I need to know exactly what I can hear, what I can see, what I can smell, what I can touch, what I can taste, all of it. I need to feel like I'm being transported there. Unfortunately, I realized that this is the second time I've tried recording this, and again, my mic went out, so there was no point in me holding it this whole time, and I'm just going to continue like this because I cannot restart it. The second thing that I look for in a fiction book is a really mature lyrical tone. I cannot stand when a protagonist is self-unaware or juvenile in a way that just makes me feel like I don't want to be in this person's head. I don't like their perspective on things. Generally, I like for the tone to be kind of like you're imagining a crone in the Victorian era rocking a baby to sleep, telling them a bedtime story. That's the kind of vibe I'm looking for. I don't need any quirky shit. This is just a personal pet peeve of mine. I know a lot of people do like a very strong personality coming through with the voice. I personally can't stand it. I need it to be very lyrical, very mature, old-timey words, all of that stuff. Something else that I look for is obviously, like I've been saying, elements of the supernatural, witchcraft, mysticism, mythology, suspense. So to give you an example, I love Elizabeth Kostova. Her book, The Historian, is one of my favorites, and if you're not familiar with it, it is about Dracula and the search for Dracula. Her other book, The Shadowland, or I think she has a few others now as well, but when I read The Shadowland, it just left me a little bit disappointed because it always sort of hinted at supernatural elements that never panned out. And so for me, it was kind of like I was left wanting a little bit more. It was still really beautifully written, important themes. It sort of went back and forth between the Holocaust and present day. I just wish that there had been a little kernel of supernatural in it by the end of it. And the following are not necessary for me in a book, but they're definitely bonus: an exotic setting. So for me, this just means something different from what I'm used to, something further from where I am. It could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be anything specific, any specific type of setting, just something that's novel to me and that transports me somewhere new. Dialectical characters. I like when characters are flawed, when we have protagonists that have both darkness and light in them. I think it kind of falls flat when characters are two-dimensional, when they're either all bad for some reason or they're all good for some reason. It just doesn't make sense with what I know about people's psychology, because people are very multifaceted. And I do appreciate when there are multiple storylines and sort of time jumps, especially because I just really appreciate all things historical. They seem somehow like mystical to me, and so because the past is so elusive, to be able to jump from present day to something 50 years ago, or maybe 500 years ago, maybe even 1,000 years ago, it feels really important to me. It feels like going back to the origins of why things are the way that they are. I will say there are times when I don't think it's done very well, either because there are too many point of views or because there are too many characters and you kind of lose track with like what's happening in the present, what happened in the past, how are they related, who are all these different people. So it's got to be done well. Sarah Maine has some books that jump timeline like this. They're okay. They're not like my favorite, but I appreciate them. Now, as for nonfiction, I'm not like particularly picky in terms of what I'm looking for. I think if I can learn something from a book, then I've met the purpose of that book. Like I said, it could be psychological, it could be spiritual, it could be financial. It doesn't really matter as long as I feel like I'm learning something from it. Ideally, it's evidence-based, if it is based on research. I don't like when people try to twist the research to fit their narrative. I appreciate being honest about what the research says. And this is important. Again, I cannot stand a quirky voice. It just gives me the ick. I do not like when authors let a really strong personality through their writing. I like for it to be professional, somewhat neutral. This is why I can't stand Brene Brown's writing, for instance. I think she has valuable things to say, but something about the voice that she writes it in just really bothers me. Another one that I read recently is We Should All Be Millionaires, and the voice was just so intense. So like, you know, like I'm not against cursing. I've cursed even on this channel, but when it's like so much, it's overpowering, it's distracting, it's just not necessary. It's like, I know you have a personality, but this is a piece of professional writing. It's okay for it to be written professionally. What do you guys think about this? Do you like when an author's personality really strongly shines through the book? Because I feel like people have different opinions on this. I also really appreciate when books are clearly and beautifully written. If I feel like a nonfiction book is unclear or it's not structured in a way that makes sense to me, then it's kind of harder to grasp its message. And if it is written in a really, again, lyrical, beautiful way, that makes it so much more enjoyable. So for instance, Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Oh my god, like this is psychological Jungian, and yet it is written as if it's fiction. It actually does have a lot of folklore that she goes into in this book. And so if you're able to combine the beauty of fiction with the clarity of nonfiction, to me, you have my heart. Someone else that writes really beautiful spiritual nonfiction and extremely beautiful prose is Danielle Dulsky. Pretty much all of her books I adore. And something else that I look for in a nonfiction book is I don't like when it feels like fluff. I do not like when it seems like an author was trying to hit a page count or a word count, or that the publisher was making them flesh it out, and it just doesn't seem like they have that much to say. I would rather read a 50-page book that's dense with things to learn from than a 300-page book that feels like it's all fluff and repeating itself. Generally, I don't like when people repeat themselves. I don't even like when I repeat myself, which is why it's so frustrating that I'm literally recording this again. But yeah, that's what I look for in a book. Those are my favorite genres. Let me know what you look for in a book, what your favorite genres are. I would really love to build sort of like a sense of community on this channel and get to know a little bit more about you, the subscribers. And I hope you have a great day.